Hi, I'm Caroline Kostak. I'm with XEVA Operations in the Flight Operations Division. So we work very closely with the internal science team like Kelsey and Noah and several of the other presenters today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what all goes into the execution of an EVA. So next slide. Apologize that a lot of this is just lots of words, but it's a little difficult to explain without just putting it out there. So this is a high level of what the overall mission looks like from an EVA point of view. So after we land, we will do some post-landing EVA systems preparation. That's mostly the night before. So we will land and then we'll have some time to do some activities to get the suits and the equipment ready. Then we'll do, the next morning, we'll do what we call EVA prep. We'll conduct our EVA, then we'll do some cleanup activities. We'll do some EVA turnaround, is what we're calling the operations that we do in between EVAs, and then we will repeat that for as many EVAs as we have, and then we will do some ascent prep. So each of these yellow boxes, we can drill down a little bit more. So the next slide, we'll talk about post-landing EVA systems prep. So once we land on the surface, we'll do what we're calling a post-landing surface inspection, where we'll look out the windows and any camera views that we have and just make sure that we understand where we actually landed and see if that correlates to what we were expecting. We expect that we will have pretty good imagery before we go there, so we don't expect too many surprises, but you never know. Then we will unstow and configure the tools and equipment inside the HLS. We'll configure our suits. We'll do a checkout of the suits. So we're not sure exactly how the suits will be configured for landing, whether they'll be soft stowed or hard stowed. We're still working out all those details, but we'll put the suits all together or remove launch locks or whatever is needed. And then we'll be set for the next day, which will be our EVA day. So next slide, we'll go to EVA prep. So for EVA prep, they will start the morning by donning the first layer of items, and you can think of this as anything that they might put on in their crew cabin. So their undergarments, their heart rate monitor, the LCVG is the liquid cooled ventilation garment. It's kind of the outer first layer. Then they'll head down to where the suits are, and they'll do some suit initialization and power up, whatever checkout they need to do at that time. When they're about ready to get into the suit, they'll don their second layer of items, which is like their comfort gloves, the moleskin, any padding that they need, hair bands, things like that. Then they will don the XEVA suits. The suits that we're choosing to go to the moon with are rear entry suits, so it's a little different than the way that we don the ISS suits. So we'll don through the back. We will just jump on in through the back of the suit and then close the hatch. We do have a requirement that they're self-donnable. So we expect that to be fairly easy to do. They'll pressurize the suit. They'll do some comm checks. They'll do a nitrogen purge, suit leak checks. And then there's some amount of lunar EVA pre-breathe. We're still working out the exact details of what that pre-breathe protocol will be. But they need to remove all the nitrogen bubbles from their blood. Just like scuba diving. And then they will, after depressurization of the airlock or the cabin, they will go outside. The next slide. Once they get outside, well, before they go outside, they'll switch the power to the suit, which is what we call the start of the EVA. So once the suit is on battery power, that's the beginning of our EVA, they will egress the HLS. They'll configure their tools, equipment, payloads, anything that is outside of the airlock or cabin, they'll do that after they egress. Then they will perform their EVA activities, which we'll talk about in a minute. After they're done with that, they'll ingress the HLS, and then they will clean up and get ready for the next EVA. Next slide. So when they're outside, we are still working through the priorities of the mission and the actual tasks that we'll do, but we expect some combination of tasks like this. So we will inspect the outside surface assets, take pictures of the HLS landing legs or whatever it is that we need to do. We'll probably have some amount of time of EVA adaptation, which is where the crew will practice walking and bouncing around, just getting a little bit comfortable with how they move in the lunar environment. We do expect it to be a little bit different than what they're used to from their training environment. Then they will deploy payloads and science equipment or science experiments. They'll probably do some public affairs activities like planting a flag, calling the president, or whatever it is that we are going to be doing. We'll do some EVA traversing. So on Artemis 3, we'll just be doing walking traverses. We won't have a LTV or anything. And then we will go to different stations where we'll perform geology activities. This is where the science community really is involved, and the SIR is backing us up. After they're done with all of that and they arrive back to the HLS, they'll perform some dust mitigation activities because we are quite concerned about the amount of dust that we could potentially bring into the vehicle. They'll clean up, stow tools, equipment, science samples, and then we will come inside. Next slide. So drilling down into what the geology activities, we work closely with the internal science team to develop what this flow will actually look like. But we believe they will arrive at a station. They'll be, while they're traversing, providing verbal geology and terrain observations. When they get to a station, they'll probably take some panoramic imagery. They will place some sample markers. We'll talk about which samples we want them to take, or they will just tell us which samples they're going to take. They'll take imagery of the sample site before they collect. They'll collect the sample. The samples might be rock samples, regolith samples, or volatile samples in a core, like a core drill, a core sample. Then they will collect imagery after they take the sample and put their sample away, and they will move on to the next station. Next slide. So they will do that until we are done with all the geology activities for the day, and then they will head back to the lander. We'll do what we call EVA cleanup, where we stow the tools and equipment. We're not sure yet if we'll leave the tools down at the base of the lander or if we'll bring them inside. We'll probably have some thermal constraints that we need to think about to help us make that decision. We will ingress the HLS vehicle through the EVA hatch. We'll close that hatch. There's lots of conversation about whether or not we have to protect for any leakage on the hatch because of dust, and how can we best protect for that. They will connect to the donned-off stand when they're inside the vehicle, and then connect our suit umbilical, and then repressurize the HLS lander or airlock, depending on if it's an airlock or a cabin design. And that when we repressurize, that's what we call the end of the EVA. And then we move into our EVA turnaround operations. So next slide. So during EVA turnaround, we will doff the suits. We'll do any suit cleanup that's needed. Maybe we need to wipe out the inside of the suits like we do on station. Maybe there's a little bit more dust mitigation that needs to be done on the suit once they're out of it. We will be transmitting the post-EVA data, which could consist of the helmet cam video that was stored on board the suit, handheld camera imagery, maybe some suit telemetry or audio that we need to do. We'll also recharge the suit consumables and power. They'll probably have a private medical conference, just make sure that everything was okay. And then we have our sample management plan that we will be doing. So we'll weigh the samples. We're still working out the concept for high grading, which would be if we have collected more samples than the mass allowance that we have that we can take home, we might have to prioritize the samples that we have collected and decide what to do with those. So we may take some out the next day that we decided that we don't have to, that we don't bring home. And that might change how we plan the next EVA or how we execute the next EVA. We may take more samples or less samples, depending on how much mass we've collected so far. And then we will stow those samples in the HLS in their storage area. After that, we'll have an EVA conference and study any changes. So this may be the next morning. We may process any changes that we got from that EVA. We'll let the science team process the results of that overnight, and then ideally we'll send up any changes to the crew the next morning. They will have a little bit of time to read those changes and make the changes to their products and then study, and then we'll have a little tag up with the ground. They'll also prepare some logistics for the next EVA, so they'll get any equipment or payloads out that they're going to do take out on the next EVA. They'll also gather, their equipment like their mag, which is the diaper, and the any other moleskin or hardware that they need. They'll refill their drink bag, things like that, and then they will either do prep for the next EVA or they will do ascent prep. So next slide. Almost done. They will, before we launch from the lunar surface, they'll prepare the EVA suits and tools just so they don't flop around while we're launching. They will disassemble the suits if needed and then clean up any equipment. I think that is it. Next slide.
Great. Thank you so much, Caroline.
You're welcome.
So
there's a summary.
Yes, we have one more. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to summarize by everything is still in development. We still have a lot of unknowns about the order, the timing that we're doing, and we will be managing the tasks that we do through the mission priorities development process, which Jake mentioned earlier today.